There's something you've been doing for longer than you realize. Not because you chose it on purpose. Not because you woke up one day and decided to hold yourself back. But because somewhere along the way, your mind learned a pattern, a way of protecting you, a way of explaining things, a way of keeping you safe. And at first, maybe it helped, maybe it made sense, maybe it gave you something to hold on to when life felt uncertain. But now, that same pattern might be the thing keeping you in the same place. And the hardest part is, it doesn't look like sabotage. It doesn't look like fear. It doesn't look like avoidance. It looks normal. It looks like thinking. It looks like being careful. It looks like trying to make the right decision. It looks like waiting until you understand more. Waiting until you feel ready. Waiting until the timing feels perfect. But underneath all of that, there is a pattern repeating, quietly, automatically, again and again and again. And because it repeats so often, you stop noticing it. You stop questioning it. You start believing that this is just who you are, that this is just how your mind works, that this is just how your life is. But that's not always true. Sometimes, what feels like your personality is actually a pattern. Sometimes, what feels like your instinct is actually fear. Sometimes, what feels like wisdom is actually protection. And sometimes, what feels like being realistic is just an old story your mind keeps repeating. Because your mind is always trying to make sense of everything. It wants answers. It wants certainty. It wants control. So when something happens, your mind immediately creates meaning. It says, this means I'm not ready. This means it won't work. This means I should wait. This means I'm behind. This means I'll fail again. And the moment your mind gives something meaning, your body reacts to it. Your energy changes. Your confidence drops. Your decisions shift. And suddenly, you're no longer responding to what actually happened. You're responding to the story your mind created around it. And that story, if you believe it long enough, starts to become your reality. Not because it's true, but because you keep living from it. You keep making decisions from it. You keep shrinking because of it. You keep delaying because of it. You keep holding back because of it. And that is how a pattern becomes a prison. Not all at once, not dramatically, but quietly. One thought at a time. One hesitation at a time. One avoided step at a time. Until one day, you look around and wonder why nothing is changing. You wonder why you feel stuck. You wonder why you keep ending up in the same emotional place. And maybe the answer isn't that you're not trying. Maybe the answer isn't that you're not capable. Maybe the answer is that you've been repeating a pattern without realizing it. A pattern of doubting yourself before you begin. A pattern of preparing more than moving. A pattern of overthinking instead of acting. A pattern of assuming the worst before anything has happened. A pattern of believing that you need to feel confident before you take the next step. But confidence doesn't always come first. Sometimes confidence comes after movement, after the step, after the decision, after the moment where you prove to yourself that you can move even while feeling uncertain. And that's what your old pattern doesn't want you to know. Because the old pattern wants certainty. It wants guarantees. It wants proof before action. But growth doesn't work that way. Growth asks you to move before you have every answer. Growth asks you to trust the step in front of you. Growth asks you to stop waiting for the feeling and start choosing the direction. And that is uncomfortable because it interrupts what's familiar. It asks you to become aware. And awareness can feel confronting at first, because once you see the pattern, you can't pretend you don't see it. Once you realize what you've been doing, you can't keep calling it confusion. You can't keep calling it timing. You can't keep calling it not ready. Because now you know. Now you see the moment where it starts. You see the thought. You see the hesitation. You see the fear trying to sound logical. You see the way your mind creates reasons to stay where you are. And that awareness is powerful. Because awareness creates space. Space between the thought and the reaction. Space between the fear and the decision. Space between the old pattern and the new choice. And in that space, you get your power back. Not all at once, not perfectly, but enough to choose differently. Enough to pause before reacting. Enough to question the story. Enough to ask, is this true or is this just familiar? Because not every familiar thought is true. Not every automatic reaction is wisdom. Not every fear deserves to lead you. And not every pattern deserves to continue. Some patterns are only alive because you keep feeding them with belief. You believe the thought, so it gets stronger. You follow the fear, so it becomes louder. You avoid the step, so the pattern feels proven. But what happens when you interrupt it? What happens when you see the thought and don't obey it? What happens when you feel the fear and still take one small step? What happens when you stop treating every doubt like a warning and start seeing it as a habit? That's where change begins. Not in a perfect moment, not in a dramatic transformation, but in one quiet decision to not repeat the same response, to not give the same meaning, to not let the old story decide what happens next. And that might feel small, but small shifts are not small when they are repeated. One different thought becomes one different decision. One different decision becomes one different action. One different action becomes one different direction. And one different direction, over time, becomes a different life. That's why this matters. Because you don't need to change everything today. You don't need to fix your entire life. You don't need to become a completely different person overnight. You just need to notice the pattern. That's the beginning. Notice when your mind starts making everything heavier than it needs to be. Notice when you're delaying because you're afraid. Notice when you're calling it preparation, but it's actually avoidance. Notice when you're searching for more clarity, but what you really need is one step. Notice when your thoughts are not guiding you, but keeping you trapped. And when you notice it, don't shame yourself. Don't judge yourself. Don't turn awareness into another reason to feel behind. Just pause, breathe, and choose again. Because the goal is not to be perfect. The goal is to become conscious, to stop living on autopilot, to stop letting old fears make new decisions, to stop allowing yesterday's patterns, to control tomorrow's possibilities. You are allowed to choose differently, even if you've repeated the old way for years, even if it feels uncomfortable, even if part of you still wants to go back to what feels familiar. You can choose again, right here, right now, in the smallest possible way. And that choice matters because every time you choose awareness, you weaken the old pattern. Every time you choose movement, you weaken hesitation. Every time you choose trust, you weaken fear. And slowly, something changes. Your mind starts to learn something new. Your body starts to feel safer in movement. Your decisions start to feel less heavy. And your life starts to open in ways it couldn't before. Not because everything outside changed instantly, but because something inside stopped repeating the same cycle. That is the shift. That is the breakthrough. That is where your power begins again. So if you've been wondering why you feel stuck, look at the pattern. If you've been wondering why the same feelings keep returning, look at the story. If you've been wondering why you keep delaying the thing you know you need to do, look at the fear hiding underneath the logic. Because once you see it, you don't have to obey it anymore. You can acknowledge it and still move. You can feel uncertain and still choose. You can hear the old story and still write a new one. And that is how you stop sabotaging yourself. Not by fighting yourself, not by forcing yourself, but by becoming aware and choosing differently, again and again and again, until the new choice becomes familiar, until the new pattern becomes natural, until the old story no longer has the same power. So let this be your prayer. God, help me see what I have not been seeing. Help me recognize the patterns I keep repeating. Help me question the thoughts that are holding me back. Help me stop confusing fear with wisdom. Help me stop confusing comfort with alignment. Help me stop choosing what is familiar when you are calling me into something new. Give me the courage to pause, the clarity to notice, and the strength to choose differently, even in the smallest moments. Because I know awareness is where change begins. And today, I choose to see it. If this spoke to you, comment "I see it" and subscribe for daily reflections.